In the United States, the Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act of 1998 is a key federal statute to prosecute identity theft crimes. And knowingly and without authority producing an identification document or supporting materials for identification documents such as holograms or other images is a crime. And the identification documents have several features from hologram to other technical features that actually makes ID theft harder, but producing such materials is especially a crime. And knowing the transfer of an identification document or materials with the knowledge that the item is or was stolen or produced without authority is a crime. So transfer of such materials are illegal, and knowingly possessing those identification documents with the intent to use or transfer, including five or more identification materials or documents, is another crime. And knowingly possessing an identification document or materials with the intent to use the item to defraud other people is another form of crime that's actually illegal. And also the legislation sensitized that the use of such identification documents to uh, defraud others is a bigger crime. So there are many other sub punishments related with the identity theft, which you can later on read the textbook or study more on the specifics of this legislation. So the activities related with the identity theft crime can impact the relationship between countries, where this effect can impact the interstate trade or foreign commerce, as well as any materials that are sent via the mail, such as personal identifications or passports. The punishments for identity theft crimes can range from 5 years to 15 years in prison, including any fines or and prospective forfeiture of goods obtained through identity theft and materials using an identity. Under the US law, an identification document is defined as a document made or issued by or under the authority of the United States government, with information regarding a particular individual is of a type of intended or commonly accepted for the purpose of the identification of individual or individuals. This law actually makes it illegal to use any such identification information. And also the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, is actually designated to serve as a clearinghouse for identity crimes. That's where you should first look or research if you want to learn more about the ID theft. And identification documents can include names, social security numbers, date of birth, driver license or identification numbers, passport information, and employer numbers, employer identification numbers, and biometric data. And so many features can be included in an identification document, which in turn makes an issue for the criminal justice system and opportunity for cyber criminals. Identity Theft Penalty Enhancement Act of 2003 adds 2 years to any prison sentence for individuals convicted of felony who knowingly possessed, used, or transferred identity documents of another person. If that the identity theft occurs related with another person, that includes additional 2 years in prison sentence. And also this act adds 5 years to the sentence received for identity theft convictions related to any act of violence or drug trafficking, and 10 years if connected to international acts of terrorism. So what we understand from this act is that this act further punish actors who may develop or create a fictitious identities in support of acts of terrorism and any terror-related action that's punished more than the usual identity theft crimes. Identity Theft Enforcement and Restitution Act is important because of its impact on sentencing and the pursuit of identity theft crimes. And specifically, this act is indeed allows offenders to be ordered to pay restitution as a penalty to victims of identity theft, which in turn brings an additional punishment for that type of criminals, and expands the ability for agencies to track computer fraud actors engaging in interstate or international offenses. And consequently, this act imposes criminal and civil forfeitures of property used in the commission of computer fraud behavior, which in turn adds another punishment for identity theft criminals related legislation. In the US, the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act of 2003 provides additional protection for customers. That's where you have the power that the actually government imposes its power to banks and other financial institutions. And it's required that the businesses to remove computer credit card detail from receipts. This is obviously to protect the consumers, and consumers are also provided credit reports for free by these financial institutions. And it's allowed in that the individuals to place and receive credit alerts to better identify fraudulent transactions. Many times you get a credit alert from your bank. Sometimes you get a text message or email. Various methods are included in this actually legislation that actually protects the US citizens. And many US states have outlawed the identity theft and fraud, and some place these laws under existing computer hacking statutes, and others place these laws under language pertaining to computer fraud. And several states have actually specifically created statutes making it illegal to possess, obtain, or transfer identity documents. And overall, 47 states have created data breach notification laws for the citizens of the United States. That's how the government protects the. Remember the definition of data breach from previous sessions. States have created the data breach notifications laws, which means notifying individuals of security breaches of information involving personally identifiable information. Having said that, this means that companies or any type of organizations are expected to notify their users in terms of the data breach or data leakage from their department. And security breach laws typically have provisions regarding who must comply with the law. including businesses, data or information brokers, and government identities. And there are also definitions of personal information considering name combined with the social security number, driver license, or state ID. And it also covers what constitutes a breach and requirements for the notice. In addition to laws pertaining to fraud and theft, a smaller number of states have developed new legislation related to large-scale data breaches that impact the state broadly, like the Heartland Bank and TJX compromises. And breaches can affect hundreds of thousands of victims through no fault of their own. You don't make any fault, you just use a trusted web page or a bank website, and it's not your fault. It's the data breach that's under the responsibility of the organization holding your information and creating a substantive need to ensure the consumers are protected by the law. It's also important to know the legislation in other countries in regard to identity theft, as many of the cybercrime and identity theft investigations are extended towards other countries, as the cybercrime and identity theft is usually transnational in nature. So India criminalized identity theft under Section 66 of their criminal code regarding the fraudulent use of passwords or identity data. And Canada has similar language regarding possession of personal identity information for using fraud or deceit under Section 402.2, and also criminalizes the use of personally identifiable information under Section 403. The UK actually criminalized identity fraud through the Fraud Act of 2016. So it's a crime to falsely represent or the facts or laws in the UK, and failure to disclose information when legally mandated is a crime, and fraud based on abuses of power to safeguard personal information in the UK. In the UK, the National Fraud Authority acts as a clearinghouse for victims of fraud. It was created in 2008 and assesses the state of fraud in the United Kingdom, and operates the Action Fraud Reporting Service. So it's similar to the IC3, as actually it accepts complaints from victims. And National Fraud Intelligence Bureau operated by the City of London Police. The European Union Convention on Cybercrime includes 2 articles on fraud and forgery, and it requires nations to adopt legislation criminalizing access, input, deletion, or suppression of data that leads it to be considered fraudulent. The EU legislation actually requires governments to adopt new law based on the articles on the EU conventions, and criminalizing the input or alteration of data or interference with computer systems to fraud or gain economic advantage is a crime in the European Union. And also regulating the fraud globally is quite an important matter, as uh, all the nations should collaborate and have similar laws to deal with the identity theft and other types of cybercrime. And in the US, most local law enforcement agencies are the primary contact point for fraud victims, and state attorneys general act as a clearing house for fraud cases, and they can also accept complaints on behalf of victims. And also the U.S. Secret Service has the primary role in investigating online fraud. It operates the Financial Crimes Division, which investigates financial institution fraud, access device fraud, where personal banking and credit data is used to engage in fraud. And the FBI also investigates, as you know, cyber crimes against financial institution and threats to the economic safety of the U.S. people. And remember, the Internet Crime Complaint Center was founded to receive the complaints from victims of online fraud. It's a joint operation of the National White Collar Crime Center and the FBI, but it's mostly managed by the FBI and IC and CPB also investigate the use of fraudulent documents and counterfeit currency at the nation's border. Federal Trade Commission serves as a key reporting mechanism for victims in the U.S. and accepts complaints online and or over the phone, pursues federal lawsuits against industry groups that fail to protect customers, and provides reports on the scope of fraud and provide information to consumers to protect their credit and personally identifiable information. And there are similar entities operate around the globe, such as the UK's Information Commissioner's Office and Australian Information Commissioner and Spain's AEPD. And in Canada, Canada operates a reporting service called Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. It's a joint operation of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Ontario Provincial Police, as well as the Competition Bureau. It accepts reports from or complaints from victims and develops leads for law enforcement agencies, and also operates the criminal intelligence analysis units where the intelligence information is collected and analyzed within the bureau. And the anti-phishing working group is a not-for-profit global consortium of industry, academia, and law enforcement. It measures the scope of phishing attacks, coordinates responses to phishing between different organizations, and also provides recommendations to governments and also to the industry group. Thank you all for listening to the session on cyber fraud, and I hope to see you all in the next session. Thank you.